Unions fighting for the little guy, fighting for minorities and equality. Since when? Eliseo Medina shed some light on what is really going on, all about their union leadership.
If we are to expand this electorate to win, the progressive community needs to solidly be on the side of immigrants. That will solidify and expand the progressive coalition for the future. And let me tell you, when you are in the middle of a fight for your life, you will remember who was there with you.
You got it? The progressives. This is a union member saying what the political strategy should be. You just be with the immigrants. It's about power. Gaining and keeping power. But this time on a global scale. They have been dividing and conquering, and I know the unions are going to go crazy with this. We'll show you the evidence. They've been dividing and conquering forever. Well, now who's going to be divided and conquered? This little guy scam has been going on for years. Now, because just as with the racist history of many politicians in Washington, most Americans have forgotten their history, and that is why we're here now. We have more on the history of union racism, and tomorrow, the history of American communism. It's a DVR show that you must have. Keep it for your children. You must do your own homework on this. And one more thought. That's on tomorrow's show. One more thought. They just got the New York Times list, and the Overton Window is the #1 New York Times bestseller in America. I thank you for that. I thank you so much for reading and caring about what we do on this program. I hope I haven't let you down. And if you haven't read it, read it. We worked hard on it. I think you'll enjoy it. A thriller on what could possibly be coming our way. Open your mind just a little bit and pass it on to a friend. The Overton Window, available in bookstores everywhere. Coming up, more with a guy who's studied this for a very long time. Next. We've been talking about the history of racism in the labor unions, and you need to understand what labor leaders stood for in this country. Paul Moreno, he is the Associate Professor of History at Hillsdale College. He is the author of this book, Black Americans and Organized Labor, A New History. Paul, you've been watching the show back in the green room?
Yes.
Have I gotten anything wrong?
The basic point that race has been used as a tool by organized labor is in different ways.
I have a feeling that I am I'm making all the wrong enemies. I have a feeling I'm in trouble with the labor unions. They're not going to be happy with today's show. Correct?
Nobody likes their dirty laundry.
Nobody likes their dirty laundry. Yeah, sure, I understand that. Okay. What's going to be said is, because Trumpka just did an interview with the New York Times, did he not?
They did a profile of him where he told the usual story. That unions have been the victims of employers manipulating racial feeling, whereas more often it's been the other way around.
Okay, I just want to show this. This is an editorial. This is written by Frederick Douglass. This was in, was it the New York Times?
His own newspaper, the New National Era.
Okay, New National Era. Frederick Douglass. Give me the history of this before I read the quote.
Well, Douglass himself and his son had been a typographer, and they'd seen firsthand discriminatory action by labor unions. Douglass himself, when he'd been a ship's caulker in Baltimore, and his son, who had been excluded from the typographers union.
Okay, so here's what he said. You ready? On more than one occasion, we have attempted to convince the working men of the injury to their interest of labor unions of the country, and also their oppressions and tyrannical course towards fellow workers, as well as to their employers. The history of these organizations, generally managed not by industrious workmen themselves, but by unprincipled demagogues who control them for their own benefit, furnishes abundant proof almost every day of their mischievous influence upon every industrial interest in the country. This seems to me to be the exact same story that happens today. It's not the union workers, it's the people at top that have convinced the workers that, hey, just You know what I mean?
Yes, and considering the fact that we have a system of compulsory unionism in America, where as long as the majority of the work unit wants to join a union, the minority are forced to join, whether they want to or not.
Okay, so I want to get into a little more of the history of the unions with you here in a second. But I want to ask you this: there is I'm trying to remember the labor union where if you opt out, you still have to pay dues. You can't ever get out of these things, right? How is this when you look at history? And when unemployment goes up, when there's problems, when they start blaming things on the banks or the capitalists, et cetera, Marxist, communist, revolutionaries, and unions use race and everything else. Is there a way to diffuse this other than just knowing history?
Well, I think if you look at black Americans especially, for a long time they opposed labor unions because they understood the basic principle of equality before the law and individual rights and those sort of classical liberal principles. So that even though they understood that unions discriminated on the basis of race, they had reasons to oppose unions on a non-racial basis as well, because they really don't benefit the workers generally. And you can make a strong argument that they don't even benefit their own members because of the way they depress overall economic activity.
Wouldn't we be reversing the racism here? Because the numbers are growing, whites are diminishing, and Hispanics are growing, et cetera, et cetera. Wouldn't it be in the best interest? I mean, I hear SEIU and everybody else doing this. They're reaching out to the illegal immigrant base. Do you see a reverse racism coming now?
Well, it's maybe a reversal of the way that race is being used, in that I think SEIU and the labor movement today, which is principally about public employees, not private sector employees, because unions pretty much drove them out of the economy.
Hang on, I've got to break. You got to finish that sentence in a second. I have a hard network break. Back in a second. Sorry, I got 9 seconds. Okay, we are running out of time. You're going to have to do your own homework. Read this book. This is Black Americans and Organized Labor, A New History by Paul Moreno. There it is. And, I mean, I just opened it up, and what does he go to? The Wilson administration. I hate that guy. Real quick, let me just ask you this. Finish your thought real quick that we had in the last break.
Yeah, that 100 years ago or so, when unionization was in the private sector only, public sector employees couldn't organize, as you said. It made sense for unions to exclude blacks because they were doing what any other cartel, like OPEC, does. You know, you want to limit the supply so you can raise the price. Today, now that private sector employment is disappearing and private sector unions are declining, in the public sector, a different economic incentive is there. There you want to broaden the numbers because you're bringing in really not so much union members as voters.
Okay.
So I think the strategy today is to bring these people, get them voting Democratic, and the Democratic Party will enact card check and other kind of legislation that unions want.
America, I want you to know, this is controversial stuff, but you need to ask these questions and think along these lines. Read this book. And anybody who says, oh, that's old history, I'll bet you those are the same people that say our founders were racist. I'm just saying.
Glenn wrote The Overton Window because he's always looking for a great thriller that would keep him entertained, but also one that isn't packed with all sorts of sex and language and ultra-graphic violence that you get in some thrillers. Look, Glenn knows sex sells, but he's kind of hoping the absence of it sells better. The Overton Window, in bookstores everywhere, or online at glennbeck.com/books.
Tomorrow, commies. Friday, African-American heroes.